Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As you file into our webinar room, I do need to do a little bit of legal housekeeping before we get started. Advice Chooser, the host of this webinar, is not a registered investment advisor. We cannot and do not give financial advice. Today's presentation is for educational purposes only and cannot be considered advice for any person's individual situation. Advice Chaser regularly hosts informative webinars such as this one, featuring a variety of knowledgeable professionals, many of whom are licensed advisors. Any opinions, ideas, jokes, or principles expressed by presenters are their own, and however true, funny, or interesting are not endorsed by Advice Chooser. Please do not act on the information you hear today without consulting a qualified financial professional. Well, we're thrilled to bring you this educational presentation today. Attendees are muted, but we do encourage you to ask questions using the chat box. And we do have a question and answer period today at the end of the presentation. Now, if you ask a question in the chat box and we're not able to get to it, please leave your phone number as well. We'll make sure someone reaches out to you after today's event to address your question. We want this experience to be as educational as possible. Once again, please don't hesitate to reach out, ask for clarification or expansion of the material. That's why our experts are here today. I'd love to introduce you to today's guests. Our moderator today is Chase Tusshouse, a partner with Tusshouse Wealth Management. Prior to becoming a financial advisor, Chase worked in the manufacturing industry as an engineer for L3Harris and SpaceX. Chase graduated from the University of San Diego with a Bachelor of Arts and Science degrees in Industrial and Systems Engineering. He is a member of the University of San Diego Alumni Board, the co-chair of USD's Shiley Marcos School of Engineering and Computer Science Alumni Council, and a member of the Oceanside Theater Company Board of Directors. He and his wife spend their free time mentoring local youth. And Chase, why don't you come off of mute, say hello, so that people can see who their moderator is.
Hey, thanks, Marche. Yeah, very excited for this webinar today. This actually, Jessica is also a USD alumni, and we'll get into that introduction in a second. But this type of engineering and what we're talking about is something that I had previously with in a much later time, but I just was the type that don't get on my bridge. So we have a real engineer here, and I'm excited for her to share with y'all.
Thank you very much. And Jessica, I am sorry, I forgot to ask pronunciation of your last name. Is it
Jessica Lures?
Okay, thank you very much.
There you go. You're still with that. Lures.
So Jessica Lures earned her degree in Industrial Systems Engineering from the University of San Diego, just as Chase said, and began her post-collegiate career by working as a manufacturing engineer as a civilian for the Navy. She was promoted shortly afterwards to process engineer and then to lead quality engineer for the FA-18 aircraft line. After this, she moved to Phoenix, Arizona to work for Honeywell as a customer quality engineer for various commercial aviation companies. And all throughout these positions, she was increasing her Lean Six Sigma knowledge, ultimately resulting in getting her Lean Six Sigma Black Belt certification through the American Society of Quality. She is now the owner of Modern Efficiency, a consulting company which helps small to medium-sized companies save costs, define critical processes, and identify areas that can be improved while eliminating waste and error-proofing their systems. And we're really excited to have you here today, Jessica. And I know that not everyone here is in the engineering, manufacturing type background. So we're excited because a lot of these principles you had said work for any type of business. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to you.
Awesome. Thank you for the intro, Marche. Yeah, I'm really excited to speak with everyone today. And as she said, I'm the owner of a process improvement company, and I help companies across the country. My background is primarily in manufacturing with aerospace and defense, but I help sectors, all different sectors as well. So the hopes of today's presentation is that we can help you to find easy ways to improve your company. So in order to do this, I'm going to run through some Lean and Six Sigma methodologies and thoughts. So to start out, I wanted to explain what first Lean Six Sigma is to those of you not as familiar. The basic thought of Lean and Six Sigma is to reduce defects per potential opportunity. So the idea is that if you use these methodologies to the highest completeness, you can reach a Six Sigma quality standard. What this means is that for every million opportunities for defects, only 3.4 defects are actually created, which is insanely impressive, and only a few companies in the world have actually reached this level. But if you use these thoughts and methodologies, you can maybe even get to 3 or 4 Sigma, which would still result in a very profitable company. So Lean and Six Sigma are now used rather interchangeably. And while there is a difference between the two of them, both of them focus on providing customers with the best cost, quality, delivery, and ability to adapt to change, so to make sure that we're able to change quickly for our ever-evolving climate and different customer demands. So on the slide, you can see the definition as stated by American Society of Quality of Lean, non-value added, and Six Sigma. But more simply put, when you hear lean production or to lean out a process, just think of it as we're trying to remove any waste and promote standardization and flow. And then likewise for non-value added, just think that you are eliminating every step in the process that's not necessary for the process. And this sounds very obvious, but is not always done. And then lastly, think of Six Sigma as it focuses on ways to reduce variation in your company's processes. For the most part, Six Sigma we use when we're working on large projects that months long to a year. It's very data-driven, statistics-based. But lean and waste-driven tactics you can use daily, very simple little things. So that's what we're going to focus today's seminar on. I wanted to start by giving you a few examples of what I have seen on companies that have used lean manufacturing and waste reduction as ways to improve their companies. So my first example has to do with wasted movement and maximizing throughput and layout. So I've seen this in various different companies, but I worked with a company that needed to do non-destructive inspection, specifically on a large product. And this inspection that had to be done was half a mile away from where they were actually manufacturing the product. And this inspection had to take place at a minimum 10 times for this product. So as you can imagine, this was a huge burden on schedule and budget. So we first came in and reviewed the inspections to see if we could batch them, so that when we were going to the inspection building, we weren't just doing one inspection, we were doing 5. And then we identified if we could use some portable technology. So could we do the inspection actually where it's being manufactured? So this technology was procured, and then we were able to, I think the limit was about 50% of the inspections took place like this. And then lastly, we were able to build a facility behind where they were manufacturing and do the rest of the inspections in close proximity. So not only did this result in decreased overhaul time by about 20%, this also helped with defects that were being induced by traveling and transporting this large product to and from multiple times a day. Yeah, so this was the specific example with inspection, but wasted movement is something that I see a lot. Another example, so you have to meet a new demand. Say that it's double what your previous output was. So kind of an example of this is there was a company where senior management added about 25% more workforce in order to review work instructions for a new product. And the number of work instructions that had to be reviewed was more than double what they had been reviewing previously in a given month. So this sounded great in theory, but these new reviewers were not familiar with the requirements to review the work instructions. And when they were sending them to engineering to be approved, more than 80% of them were being rejected and turned back. So we had to create a set of standardized templates that would guarantee quality and increase productivity for these reviewers. A formal training was given, and we also encouraged those reviewers to watch the process take place on the floor so they had a better understanding of the process they were documenting. So this improved quality of work instructions produced and decreased rework time by reducing the amount of work instructions that were rejected by engineering. So this example had to do with documentation, but similar techniques can be applied to physical manufacturing processes as well. So I get the question a lot, where do we start? How do I know what's actually affecting my bottom line? What's causing the most customer complaints, etc.? My first answer is always going to be to analyze data. But a lot of small companies do not have easily accessible data, and that's completely fine. You can still make improvements without it. So if you do not have a database showing defects or rework, I would start by mapping out the process. Honestly, I would start mapping out the process even if you have data. This is what I do every time I'm going into a company because it gives you a really good idea of the overall process. And a lot of the time when you sit to map out your process, what you think is the process isn't actually the process. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Your process may have evolved and it's working, but you need to know what this is in order to see issues that could be happening, such as there may only be one person trained for this step that you didn't even know was taking place. So you want to train more people. Or maybe you weren't aware that you needed a new supplier to help with this other step that was taking place. So generally, this is a good idea to give you some ideas of where there might be holes. And then if for some reason you map out the process and everything looks great and you don't see any areas that can be improved, I like the exercise of bringing all of your stakeholders into a room and having them write on 3 different sticky notes issues that they've been having. Have them do this quietly, don't let anyone discuss their answers, and then have them put it onto a wall and see if there is any similar issue that comes up. More often than not, there'll be about a third of them that are the same exact issue. But if this also isn't the case, then you can maybe discuss with everyone, hey, which thing do you think would have the greatest impact on making our company better? And then lastly, a great other avenue to go down is customer complaints if you have access to those.
Jess, we did have a question kind of come in. You mentioned holders, and the question was, as far as getting stakeholders involved, like how important is it to make sure that people are engaged and I guess are ready and wanting to be a part of an effort like this? And because I know maybe sometimes if you don't have everybody on board, getting that type of good data or getting people that are willing to go extra mile up front, back end might be a little difficult.
Yeah, most definitely. It's really important to have support, especially from upper management, in order to get the result that you're looking for. But when you're thinking about who are my stakeholders, a good question to ask yourself is, could this process take place with or without this person? And if the answer is no, then you definitely need them on board and at these meetings and to get their buy-in. And then kind of on the opposite side of that, if you think to yourself, if I had this person involved, would my process or my product do better with their investment and support? Maybe you don't necessarily need them, but it could be a good idea to involve those people as well. And that could help the success of your process further down the road.
Jess. And then you also mentioned like, okay, we're identifying where you're hurting, right? So that's something you just do once and you're done? Or is it something that you need to be doing on a consistent basis, or is it just kind of when you feel you need it?
I definitely would be doing on a consistent basis, but if you're going through Six Sigma lean thoughts, then it's kind of going to become kind of common practice, and you will have these parameters and safe settings in place that will trigger when you need to reevaluate your items, and it'll kind of just be on its own review.
Very cool. Thank you, Jess.
So this slide we're talking about, so you have data, or maybe you don't have data and you want to start collecting it. These are some good areas to think about collecting data in. So you want to look at your quality metrics, your rework, your scrap rates, turnaround time, financial reports, and then keep in mind that not all data is good data. There's definitely a sweet spot of collecting enough data and then collecting too much that you can't do anything actually with it. So depending on your throughput, I always like to start collecting data for, let's say, a week or a month if you have a low throughput, and then analyzing it and seeing, is what I collected actually helping me? And a lot of the time you'll look at what you collected and said, hey, these 2 items that I was collecting, I actually have nothing to do with them in the end, and I don't need to waste my time collecting it. Or you'll say, hey, I need to actually add on this 1 item because that would really make it so that I could see this, this, and this, and that would be great. So make sure that you don't just come up with this list and then not kind of manipulate it as you're going through, and be open to changing that. And then also, once you have ironed out what data you want to be collecting, put it into the hands of somebody that it's easy for them to add these to their job duties. You want to make it so that this isn't something you just do for a month and then let go of. Maybe it's even somebody on the floor that can write down these items in a book that they have at the end of the day that takes 5 seconds, and then somebody else inputs that into Excel at the end of the month. Or just make it easy and something that everyone is comfortable doing so that you can continue to do it and have good data. And another question I would ask is, have you done a capability study or possibly looked into statistical process control? This is a study that helps when your process has gone outside of your system's working parameters. And it's best done through a trained professional consultant, but if done correctly, you can identify an issue before it's a major issue. So for example, say you are working and you are grinding materials and you have 10 different grinding machines, and you're going to put in place a parameter that if you have 1 grinding burn on the same machine and you see that in less than a 3-month time span, then you're going to shut down that specific machine and evaluate it. And those types of parameter controls help you so that maybe those 3 burns you're able to rework quickly, but that 4th one would have been so out of alignment that you would have had to have scrapped that entire part, or worse, maybe there would have been a crash on that machine that would have hurt somebody. So by putting in place the parameters of like 1 burn on a specific machine in less than 3 months is something that is good and can help you fix issues early on. And then I also wanted to go over 8 types of waste. So this is a lean methodology. And if you can dive into any of these areas for process improvement. So again, going over non-value added, this is anything a final customer wouldn't want to pay for. So overproduction. So this is producing sooner or faster or in a greater quantity than is needed for your next operation. Inventory. So this is excess parts or supplies of material. So an excess of something is not a good thing. Defects. When defects occur, additional material, labor, machine time has to be put into place. You may have to add extra warranty costs. Over processing. This also represents an effort that does not add value. Waiting, so this could be waiting for equipment, waiting for instructions, waiting for material, anything you're waiting for that does not add time that you're wasting your labor hours for. And then motion, so this is movement by people or equipment specifically that doesn't add value. And then transportation is the movement of your physical product or parts that doesn't add value. And then one we don't really think of is people. So failing to use a person's skills to their greatest abilities is a waste, or not listening to the creativity that they have in terms of improvement efforts is a waste. You want to make sure that the people that are working on your product directly, they're going to have some really good ideas of ways to make improvements, and you want to listen to those ideas. And maybe though you won't implement all of them, if you show that you are willing to implement a few of them, it'll go a long way. And then I wanted to go over a few of those types of waste with some examples so you can get an idea of what solutions would look like for those. So for inventory, let's say that you have a machine shop and you use a specific coolant. It may seem easy to purchase 10 drums of coolant at a time so that you have plenty of hand. And the drums are those huge, big gallon. So you order 10 of them. But now you have to figure out a place to store all of these and the overhead costs with those. So you put them in the corner that you could actually be having another machine in that corner of the machine shop, and they could be making another product. Or worse, maybe you don't even have a corner to put them, so they're just randomly placed around the shop, and now you're using your operator's time to move them so that they can get to what they need to do. So when you are down, a good idea that I would recommend is to put in place a Kanban system. So all this means is that you create a trigger for when to order new drums. So let's say, depending on your throughput, you're down to 2 drums, and then it is flagged for someone to reorder another 2. And I mean, this could be something very automated and complex system, or this could be just the last person that uses the 3rd drum emails the purchaser and says, hey, can you order another 2? So something like that is a great example of inventory waste. And then let's look at over-processing. So something I see a lot is that companies will be over-processing their dimension tolerances. So you want to see what standard your shop always meets, and then compare that to what the standard is the customer is requiring. So let's say the customer requires you to dimension a part to 1/10 of a thou plus or minus, but the operator of the machine shop is manufacturing this part to plus or minus 1/100th of a thou. This is great in theory. You're making a more precise quality part, but you're spending much more labor hours and machine time and inventory that you don't necessarily need to be doing, and the customer's not even going to be happier that you're giving them this. They might not even realize. So an exercise I would recommend is to review all of your customer requirements against what you're actually manufacturing them to and see where you fall. And then I have another example for people. So if you're analyzing your employees' skills, say you have an employee that is amazing at the specific process. So you don't want to train them on any other processes due to them being your specialist in this one other area. But by removing them from your other potential skilled positions, you're creating a potential bottleneck or a single point of failure. Also, there may then not be somebody else trained to do their role. It's perfectly fine to have a preferred operator for a specific task, but cross-training is going to make it so that your day-to-day operations run more smoothly. So I would recommend creating a training matrix for each of your employees and what their skilled duties are that they're trained in. So on one side, I would have your employees' names, the top of it, do their duties or the processes, and then you'll really easily be able to see where there is a hole in your system, where only one person is trained, and you can figure out a great time to add in training for those other operators.
Yes, so we had a kind of a few questions come in here around the same topic. So I will try to put them all into one here for you, but it kind of revolves around, and maybe touching on inventory really kind of hits this home, but current supply chain issues, right? And how important it is to practice good, like, have good lean practices in place. But can you just kind of touch on that, and then maybe as that relates to, you talked about ordering new material, but how important is it to have these lean practices for issues like this?
Yeah, so supply chain is a huge issue right now, especially amidst COVID. It's hard to get anything in, and maybe you're used to getting something that ships in a month and it's taking 3 months. So you definitely want to implement some lean principles in order to have that in place. And systems like the inventory Kanban systems really helps with that. So you can see that, hey, I've gone through all of my rags and I need more rags. It could be something as simple as that. Or maybe you want to look into getting multiple suppliers right now, so that you have somebody to fall back on if something happens with that shop, because there's been a lot of that going on right now as well. So just making everything as organized as you possibly can, and having somebody be responsible for those items, and that they know that, hey, I'm personally responsible, that if we run out of rags, I need to tell somebody, not run out, but if we have 3 bags of rags left, that I need to tell somebody that we're running low, and just making sure that people know their specific duties to get that going is really helpful.
Great. Thank you, Jess.
So that was kind of the end of what I had prepared. I don't know if we wanted to go into if there's any other Q&A.
Yeah, so we had a few questions kind of come in. This first one, just because I have a slight background in it, I find kind of humorous, but someone asked about you mentioned you were a Six Sigma bull. I assume that probably doesn't have a whole lot of martial arts background to it, but maybe kind of explain what that is, and maybe the different levels, and why it might be important to work with someone who has a black belt.
Yes. So I do not have any expertise in karate or martial arts. I wish I did, but there are mostly three levels of a Six Sigma training. So when you start out, you would be a yellow belt, and a lot of companies offer this, and it's just a basic understanding of the principles. You'll get a rough overview and be able to work with somebody else that's more experienced in Six Sigma. The step above that is a green belt, and there's also a test you have to take with it, ensure that you know there's projects that you have to do. You'd be working directly with a black belt certified person during these projects. And then then you get to the black belt level, which is where I am at. So you have to complete a certain number of projects. They get submitted to National American Society of Quality. They approve that you know what you're talking about, that you've used all these methodologies correctly. You have to prove a cost savings for these companies to be able to submit them. And then there is a national test that changes every month so that you can't get any of the answers. So if you want to go even beyond that, there are positions such as Master Six Sigma Black Belts. And that I believe you need to be working as a black belt for so long and you need to have so many projects under your belt for each of those years. So really working with somebody that's been studying this for a while, they can bring increased efficiency and profitability to your companies. And honestly, this is just something that I'm passionate, and you're going to find that in any other black belt, that they just really they love efficiency and improving things.
Very cool. Yeah. So no Cobra Kai or like Karate Kid, none of that. So good to know.
No,
Thank
sadly,
you.
no.
Yeah. So here's one actually that I personally kind of experienced also, but someone asked the direct question essentially of like, a lot of this sounds like it'd be really good for that high volume production if we're talking about the manufacturing world, but what about someone who has a high mix and low volume? Is this something that, like, since there's not as much throughput, is there a lot of value in following these lean and Six Sigma practices?
For sure. So you might just need to rethink about how you're thinking about your finished unit. And say you're making a car as your end unit, there are tons of processes that go into making the car. Or it could be even something that's not as manufacturing based. Say you're an insurance company. There's so many different little processes that go into your end item. And you want to think of each of those little segments as your end unit. So even though you might not be producing thousands of pens each day, there's still something deliverable that you can get out of it. And if that is the case for your company, I would not start by mapping out the entire process, because it's honestly, you might not even get through it. And then you're going to be over process improvement and say, I'm not going to do it. So why don't you just take a small little segment or a process that you suspect could be giving you the most issues and focus on that at first and see what goodness you get out of that. And then once you've improved that little small section of it, move on to a different section of it and map out that process. And don't take off more than you can chew, but there definitely is the exact same amount of value added if you're not going a large overhaul and large throughput process.
Yeah, I kind of laugh at that question because when I first started in the aerospace world and building satellites, you're only building a couple at most, right? And I just thought, all right, well, how are we going to use some of these tools and practices? And I mean, it made a big difference. So I think you definitely nailed there. So another one, and this is, I think, kind of, I think a few different people might fit in this box for kind of what I've seen here. And but people are coming out of COVID and demand is high, right? If you're producing something, and some of what you talked through, it sounds like there is a little bit of like, this taking time up front to look at things. Where are we at? Where do we need to go? How can we improve this? Maybe you can walk us through that argument of like taking the upfront cost right now versus what that like long-term benefit might be,
Right.
and why it might be important to, take that time right now.
Right. Yeah, no, I've talked to a lot of business owners that just kind of say, I'm so busy right now, I don't have the time to make these improvements. And I totally get it. I mean, it's a lot to invest, but you just have to think that if you put in the time in the beginning to look into these issues, you're going to be saving so much time on the other end. Your customers are going to be happier also because your quality of your product is going to be higher. So you're going to get more return customers. So all I can say is don't bite off more than you can chew. And I know that right now, a lot of companies are just in over their head. So take something super little and just say, hey, this month I'm going to try to look into this and see if I can improve it. And I promise you, you will see so much benefit in the end from just even doing that. And kind of what I was saying of where am I hurting in that example of everyone sitting in a room and Post-it notes. If you can find one issue that seems to be your biggest complaint, it could even take, a few days to fix it. and you will have fixed 80% of the issues. So don't be too afraid to take on the little bit more of time in order to make the big difference. It will be worth it. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually you kind of touched on something very interesting, that like that whole Pareto principle,
Right.
and maybe you could just quick highlight that and why it might be okay to just tackle the one big issue, right?
Yeah. So this is something that we learn in engineering class, but the idea is that you have this curve, and that when you look at all of your issues and possible areas that you want to dive into, that there's going to be one area that if you actually look at the defects associated with that issue, it's 80% of the defects. So you may actually think that, issue E that you're looking at is something I want to dive into, but when you actually analyze the data of how many defects are related to item E, it's going to be insignificant compared to your item A that actually does equate to 80% of your defects. So if you only have so much time to spend, you definitely want to be spending your time on fixing that 80% issue rather than the super small ones.
Yeah, so it might be like that one problem is enough, that like right now where you might have a bunch of other stuff going on, if you were to tackle that, maybe that's a piece of the pie that's very digestible, that you can say, hey, in one swoop, we were able to take care of 80% of our issues. And then later on, as time allows, you can then allocate more resources that way.
Right. Yeah, it's a great way to list your priority of in which order you should tackle each different issue that you see.
Okay, so here's an interesting question. So a lot of this we kind of talked about a little bit more internal problems. What about if it's not something necessarily in-house and it's with a supplier? Is this stuff that we can apply there?
Yes, so for sure. And I've also seen this a ton recently. So you say, hey, I've identified my issue and it doesn't have to do with me. It has to do with this part that I get from somebody else. And then I just have it here and there's nothing I can do. And while, yeah, it's going to be a little bit more difficult, but you still need to put implementations in place now that you know this, and also work with the supplier. So I would assuming that you can't get this part from a different supplier or there's a specific reason you're using this supplier for that item, I would recommend talking to them about it. You're probably not the only customer that is frustrated with that. This company needs to improve their company in order to keep going. So it's not a bad idea to communicate with them. And if you find there has to be somebody in their company that is open to ways of improving. But for you, as far as knowing that this is an issue, I would recommend looking at your shipments from this supplier and reviewing them right away versus waiting to use this item and then realizing, hey, I have only 3 defective units of this in-house. Now I need to wait 3 months for this item to be shipped to me so that I can move forward. Like we had said earlier, it's kind of hard to spend time doing things that don't add immediate value at the moment. But if you were to take their shipment, look at all of them and say, hey, I have 25 of these items you sent me, 5 of them are bad, communicate that with the company. I bet that after a while of doing that they're going to make sure that they send you quality products, because they're not going to want to be dealing with these calls and complaints going back and forth. But this also will help you to ensure that you're organized so where their mistakes aren't affecting you later down the line.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you want everyone there together, working towards the same cause, whether they're internal or external. But
for sure.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for questions. And I want to both thank Jessica and Chase for being here, and thank the organizations that have made this webinar possible today. And on behalf of Advice User, thank you so much to our attendees for attending. Look for an email soon with a link to the replay of this event, and you're welcome to share that with friends, family, and colleagues. Here at Advice Chaser, we're all about helping you find a financial advisor who's a great fit for your life and your financial questions. Our matching service is free to you, and every one of our advisor partners has committed to offer a free initial consultation to anyone we introduce them to. Find out more by going to advicechaser.com and click on the link to find an advisor. Once again, Jessica and Chase, thank you for being here. And to our attendees, we will see you at another webinar soon. Bye, everyone.